know if he's here, but I have it in my protocol. Your Excellency Chief Olusegun Obasanjo, GCFR, my former boss, former President of the Republic of Nigeria, ably represented by my wonderful brother, Chair of the Governing Council, Ahmadu. Thank you so much. Your Excellency, the Executive Governor of Kaduna State, Your Excellency, the Executive Governor of Delta State, and from 2 states, Delta and Abia. And he made his way here. Thank you so much for honoring me. Tomorrow you'll have my other governor, the governor of Abia State, will be here. Distinguished senators and honorable members of the House of Representatives and State Houses of Assembly, members of the Federal Executive Council, Your Majesty Nemeka Alfred Ugochukwu-Achebe, CFR, the Obi of Onitsha. Thank you so much for reaching out to me. Your Highness, the Emir of Zaza, Madam Ahmadu by Mali, CFR, thank you so much for having me. Your Highness, the Emir of Zuru, the Executive Secretary, National Universities Commission, Chairman and members of the Ahmadu Bello University Governing Council, Right Reverend and Right Honorable Justin Welby, it's wonderful to have you here. Members of the Ahmadu Bello University Senate and Congregation, former Vice Chancellors of Ahmadu Bello University, visiting Chancellors, Pro-Chancellors, Vice Chancellors, Rectors, Provosts, Commandants and Heads of Security Agencies, the President of Ahmadu Bello University Alumni Association. I'd like to recognize a special person, Alhaji Musa Bello, one of our most able philanthropists. And I'd like to also recognize a special person whom all of you have already clapped for, my wonderful husband, of 47 years. And I tell you, it's like it was yesterday. So marriage is a good thing. Marriage is a good thing. He's a neurosurgeon, but he's always there when I need him. Gentlemen and ladies of the press, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and now I'd really like to recognize the amazing students here. I just want you to give yourself 3 bosas. Let's give bosas. The faculty looks really impressive. Thank you so much for waiting out in the sun for so long. Dear faculty staff, proud parents and families, most importantly, the graduates. I'd also like to thank the Association of Igbo Women of the University who came out to welcome me. Thank you. Thank you all for the immense honor of inviting me to address you today on the topic of challenges and opportunities for Africa and Nigeria in the present global geopolitical and geostrategic context. You know what Alhaji told me? They said, too much to renchi. He said, only you will come with those words, both geopolitical and geostrategic. Before I start, even though he's not here and is ably represented, I'd like to thank President Obasanjo, who had accepted to chair the lecture today, and if not for the problems with planes, he would have been here. He, with past and present heads of state, including President John Mahama of Ghana, is grappling with Africa's position in a changing world through a new and very interesting approach called the Accra Reset, which they just presented at Davos, and we were all there together. It's always a pleasure to come home to Nigeria. But it's particularly special to be here at one of the country's most important seats of learning. It may feel like ancient history to the students here, but I'm old enough to remember when our country gained its freedom, became independent. Our erstwhile colonial masters, and please don't be upset at me, Archbishop Welby, but our erstwhile colonial masters thought higher education was wasted on Africans. At independence in 1960, we had only one degree granting institution in Ibadan. So one of the first tasks of building our nation was to build universities. Since its founding in 1962 as the University of Northern Nigeria, this institution has grown rapidly with a wide-ranging program of courses from engineering, medicine, and the sciences to languages, the arts, Islamic studies, and public administration. Ahmadu Bello University has played a vital role in the social, cultural, and economic life of our country. Its thousands and thousands of graduates include teachers, doctors, senior political figures, and top business leaders and entrepreneurs. Research conducted here has advanced the frontier of knowledge and offered practical solutions to problems from animal feed shortages during the dry season to generating wind power in rural areas where wind speeds are highly variable. And while the university's impact has been particularly strong here in the north, it has drawn students from across the entire country, in keeping with Sir Ahmadu Bello's vision that it would, and I quote, impart knowledge and learning to men and women of all races without any distinction on the grounds of race, religion, or political beliefs, end quote. I had intended not to mention any illustrious alumni by name since there are so many, but I will make one exception, because of a link to the World Trade Organization. Throughout the negotiations on our new agreement on curbing harmful fishery subsidies, which lead to illegal and unreported fishing of our oceans and cost Africa almost $12 billion a year, governments and civil society groups drew on the work of Dr. Rashid Sumaila, a professor of ocean economics at the University of British Columbia in Canada. His groundbreaking research to quantify harmful subsidies and understand how they affect marine fish stocks and people's livelihoods directly contributed to a landmark sustainability-focused World Trade Organization agreement, which entered into force just a few months ago. Professor Sumaila received his BSc in quantity surveying from Ahmadu Bello. Turning to my topic for today, I want to talk about the world and how Africa and Nigeria should be seeking to navigate it. As disheartening as the news often is these days, from Sudan to Greenland, I'm convinced that this crisis presents opportunities for the continent and for the nation. But to seize these opportunities, our leaders will need to step up at home and build stronger investment and commercial ties across the region. They must also reach out to the rest of the world, not as a supplicant for a shrinking pool of aid, but as an attractive destination for investment and trade, as the workforce and the market of the future, and as a source of diversification and resilience in the global economy. Let us take a step back and look at the changes in a world that feels like it has gone haywire. The international order of rules, norms, and institutions is facing disruptions unseen since its creation following the Second World War. The global trading system is at the epicenter of this disruption. And so is my institution, the World Trade Organization. How should we think about the ongoing turbulence? Let's picture the world in 1945, when war and economic turmoil led governments to say never again, and attempt to create a system in which countries and people could contain conflicts, trade with each other, and rise together peacefully. In 1945, however, most countries were colonies. It is not as if Africans were untouched by the war. From our country alone, tens of thousands of soldiers fought under the British banner in Burma and the Middle East. Nigerian airfields were used by the British and American Air Forces en route to North Africa, and Nigerians provided material support to the Allied war effort, whether they wanted to or not. But the choice to go to war was not ours. The rules that underpinned the post-war peace were not written for us, let alone by us. And yet, the world of multilateralism and globalization has delivered, substantially if imperfectly. The open global economy created conditions in which national boats were able to rise, and many did, though some more than others. Peace is a prerequisite for sustained growth, and the post-1945 absence of wars between great powers may be history's longest such period, although proxy wars were fought in Africa and other regions. Faster growth in poor countries, enabled by open international trade, helped lift 1.5 billion people out of extreme poverty globally since the early 1990s. While Africa did not benefit as much as some other regions from this recent wave of globalization, extreme poverty rates did decline from over half to closer to a third, though population growth meant that the overall number of poor people increased. But what the open global economy provided was the prospect and hope that if Africa got its house in order, it too could reap growth and development gains. This net positive record should make us question those who now say we should walk away from the rules-based multilateral order rather than improve it. It sometimes seems like just as Africa is getting ready to climb the ladder others used to improve themselves, those who created that ladder are now saying, wait a minute, the system doesn't work for us anymore, and we want to pull the ladder away. And we are saying, no. Why is this happening? It may be because in rich countries, there are significant segments of the population, poor people and poor regions who feel the system is not working for them. It may also be that the lessons of history have been forgotten, and the benefits generated by an 80-year-old system are being taken for granted. But on deeper reflection, I think there are more fundamental forces at work here that are causing the backlash in some developed countries, principally the US, against the rules-based multilateral system. Let me highlight this by talking about 5 key shifts that I see globally. First, there is the economic shift. In 1995, advanced economies accounted for about 60% of the global economic output in purchasing power parity terms, and developing countries only 40%. Today, these shares have reversed. Developing countries now account for 60% of global output and advanced countries for 40%. China was a big part of this story, but not the only part. Other developing economies also grew. ASEAN countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam followed in the footsteps of the original East Asian tiger economies of Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, Chinese Taipei, we call it the WTO, and Singapore. We saw the rise of India and other emerging markets. Similar patterns were seen in global trade between 1995 and 2024. The share of low and middle-income economies in global goods and services exports doubled from 16 to 32%. South-South trade went from 1/10 of global goods trade to about 25% today. The rebalancing of global economic output and performance has spawned anxiety and resentment within rich countries. This is one significant factor behind the end of overseas development aid as we know it. Countries feeling squeezed at home are less generous abroad. The USA has sharply cut back its aid spend, and European aid is under pressure as governments prioritize defense expenditures and rearmament in a changing world order in which the US seems no longer to want to be the guarantor of European security, and instead would even contribute to their insecurity. The second shift relates to inequality, particularly within countries. Stock markets are booming, while ordinary people are getting left behind. A report to the G20 last November from an expert group led by Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel Economics laureate, pointed to a global increase in incomes and wealth at the upper end of the scale, with those at the top getting an increasing share of national income and wealth. In other words, what economists call K-shaped recoveries, where the rich get richer while others lag behind. This is not just economically and socially damaging. It is a recipe for political anger. To quote Professor Stiglitz, the only true and sustainable prosperity is shared prosperity. Moreover, while inter-country income gaps have come down, too many poor countries, many of them in Africa, have remained on the margins. A new World Bank report notes that around 1 in 4 developing economies had per capita incomes last year that were lower than in 2019. The third shift is a technological shift, or rather, a succession of technological shifts. Most dramatically, the internet and now AI, that have made it easier to communicate, produce, and trade. But as with previous waves of new technology, not everyone has shared in the game. Some workers have been disempowered and even thrown out of jobs, exacerbating the inequality problems. This is not merely an advanced country phenomenon. Automation is seen as a factor in declining peak rates of industrial employment within many developing economies, dubbed premature deindustrialization. The fourth shift is an environmental and climate shift. Climate loss and damage, adaptation and mitigation impose unequal burdens across countries and within them. Biodiversity loss has accelerated with enormous potential implications for everything from agriculture to pharmaceutical development. The World Meteorological Organization estimates that African countries on average are losing 2 to 5% of GDP due to climate change, with many diverting as much as 9% of their budgets responding to the consequences of extreme weather. And finally, a demographic shift, as falling birth rates across much of the world have spawned anxiety, with heightened fears about immigration alongside labor market shortages. Africa is the last continent with strong population growth, a point that I'll come back to shortly. The reality is that global frameworks and multilateral organizations, including the WTO, have not responded adequately enough to heat strains and stresses. At the WTO today, our members' collective failure to address long-standing perceptions that the playing field for competition in trade is not level or fair has contributed to today's disruptions in trade and to the undermining of global trade rules. These disruptions and the shifts I talked about can happen. But the issue is, what are the implications for us in Africa and in Nigeria? First, we must support the rules-based global order and multilateralism, because without it, we will live in a power-based transactional order where might makes right. Guess who would lose? Who would lose most in a power-based system? Those poorer countries who have not yet had a chance to climb the ladder of prosperity, of course. In addition, we must recognize that we remain exposed to a global set of problems which can only be solved through international cooperation, such as pandemics, climate change, and water security, among others. So the question is not whether we support multilateralism or a rules-based order or not. The issue is, what type of multilateralism? It cannot be the multilateralism of old. We must reform our rules and institutions to make them more nimble and responsive to new global opportunities such as artificial intelligence and emerging quantum computing technologies. And nations must be able to come together in new plurilateral coalitions to take advantage of new opportunities in what some, like Prime Minister Makani recently called variable geometry. Second, we must look more to ourselves. Meaning, we must see how we can strengthen our own economies and our countries, introduce more economic security and prosperity both nationally and regionally. We can no longer depend on any other nation coming to assist us. with aid. Those days are over. They are over. Each country needs to look at its economic foundations and ask itself, am I doing everything I can for the economy? We have to clean up our internal economic management and make ourselves more attractive for investment by domestic, regional, and global investors. We need to grow our economies and create jobs, particularly in this country. When I travel around and I see the enormous numbers of young people, including young graduates, who are on our streets and in our homes without jobs, I know we have to create jobs. The goal for Nigeria and Africa needs to be to double GDP growth rates to 6 or 7% and to sustain the higher pace long enough to transform people's living standards and economic prospects. We know this is within reach because some countries on the continent are showing the way. Over the past decade, Ethiopia averaged 7.6% growth per year on the back of important structural reforms. Rwanda grew at 6.9% and Cote d'Ivoire at 6%. According to the African Development Bank, 11 of the world's 20 fastest growing economies in 2024 were African. As I said, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, among others. These countries are demonstrating to the continent and to the world that African economies can grow when their priorities are right. Accelerating growth and development in Nigeria is particularly important. Our economy is projected to expand by a respectable 4.4% this year, according to the latest IMF projections. But once you factor in population growth of over 2%, 2.5%, per capita living standards will rise by only a bit more than 2% per year. So we need to do better. We need to double our yearly growth rate. The whole continent's economy is being held back by sluggish growth in sub-Saharan Africa's economic giants, Nigeria, Angola, and South Africa, which together account for nearly 60% of the region's GDP. Nigeria alone represents close to 70% of ECOWAS GDP in purchasing power parity terms. We also need to strengthen our economic performance by accelerating our regional integration through the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. This is a great instrument that could increase intra-African trade by as much as 45% by 2045, according to the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Fully implementing the agreement will boost GDP by 7% above trend by 2035, while sharply increasing domestic and foreign investment and lifting 40 million people out of poverty, according to the World Bank. Key to better national and regional economic performance is greater value addition to our products. Africa's exports are still 60% raw materials and commodities. When the bulk of export income comes from raw commodities, economies are heavily exposed to price volatility. A moderate drop in prices can be enough to provide huge fiscal shocks and balance of payments and debt crisis. Spurring more manufacturing and value added would increase resilience and reduce volatility, whilst creating more and better jobs for our young people. This brings me to the third set of ways Africa and Nigeria should be responding to the shifts in the world around us to benefit from them. We must look at the opportunities offered by the new disrupted landscape and work to seize them. The opportunities are real. I see them every day, and we have no excuses not to take better advantage of them. The present crisis has only served to underscore the perils of over-dependence on China for key supplies and inputs, and on the United States for market demand. Businesses and countries were already working to reduce supply chain risks through diversification and deconcentration of sourcing and markets, what we at the WTO are calling re-globalization. Africa can benefit from re-globalization by attracting supply chain investment in a wide range of sectors, from labor-intensive manufacturing to critical mineral and processing to pharmaceuticals to renewable energy and agro-processing. we have the capacity to take manufacture, processing of our critical minerals all the way to the manufacture of EV batteries. Imports of renewable energy technology have helped to make solar and wind power cheaper than grid electricity, let alone diesel generators. But we should be looking to manufacture all these items that we import at home, not just to import them. This will create more jobs for our young people. Africa has 60% of the world's solar energy potential, but attracts only 2% of its solar power investment. I know it's changing, but we have to work harder to attract that investment. In discussions with China, I encourage them to come and invest in solar plants here and manufacture and produce here instead of sending. Let our leaders make the appropriate investment in the investment environment here to make that happen. This continent and this country has a lot going for it. On an aging planet, our young populations represent the world's talent pool of the future. By 2050, Africa is on track to account for about 25% of the global working age population. Africa is emerging as a major market in its own right. The number of middle-class people in North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa combined, defined as individuals spending the purchasing power parity equivalent of between $13 and $130 per day, will rise from 279 million today to 844 million in 2050, according to World Data Lab. That is about double the current number of middle-class people in India. Africa has abundant arable land and mineral wealth. The U.S. Geological Survey estimates that the continent holds nearly 30% of the world's known mineral reserves, including coveted rare earths and minerals, critical for the low-carbon transition. And if we leverage our abundant solar and wind, as I said, we can envision a future of African regional supply chains with mineral processing powered by clean energy, which is good for jobs, good for growth, good for the planet. These are not abstract examples. Some of these opportunities are already being realized. Ethiopia has attracted investment in labor-intensive manufacturing, textiles, leather, and so forth. Morocco and South Africa are part of the global automotive supply chain, and Morocco is increasingly integrated into the aerospace value chain and starting to make inroads into EV battery manufacturing, which I covered for us here as well. West Africa's cotton to clothing value chain is growing with support from the WTO. Not too long ago, I visited an industrial park in Benin, Lojiwe, where I was inspired to see hundreds of young people processing cotton into fabric and clothes for export to international retailers. And in contrast, I visited today in Kaduna several of our factories that are no longer working. You know, UNTL is closed. Shortex, so many textile factories. I actually did my undergraduate work on the Nigerian cotton textile industry, and it is so distressing to know we've lost 100,000 jobs in textiles in this country. We must do something about it. I know we are trying. I know that there's a new high-purity gold refinery that is coming online in Lagos and more in the works. Of course, we have our brother Aliko Dangote's refinery, helping to finally change the dynamic in which Nigeria exports crude oil, but imports refined gasoline without the ability to refine. That is good. I also know that a 600 million lithium processing plant in Nasarawa State is set to feed into global battery supply chains and hopefully will lay the groundwork for us to produce our own EV batteries, as I said. But we need to do more, and we have the capacity to do it. And just this month, Terra, a defense startup that manufactures drones and other technology designed to secure infrastructure assets, received investment from a venture capital firm led by John Lonsdale, one of the co-founders of the Palantir company. This is an amazing thing to me, and it gives me so much faith in our young people. I'm looking at you, because without waiting for government, you're coming up with new ideas, new discoveries, new support. I hope to visit these young people in Abuja, Nathan Nwachukwu and Maxwell Maduka have founded this factory that has just received this overseas equity injection or investment. So let's encourage our young people to support them in any way we can, not to wait for government, but to go out on their own and also develop enterprises that can employ themselves and other people. The services sector is also driving growth, jobs, and socioeconomic inclusion. Our dynamic digital entrepreneurs are finding new ways to solve problems that Africans face. I'm sure you're familiar with our Nigerian fintech unicorns like Flutterwave and Moneypoint, or South Africa's Timebank. Agri-tech startups are using digital platforms to help farmers raise yields by connecting them to data, trading, credit, and markets. Health tech, security tech, and logistics tech are making life more efficient for businesses and customers. African companies are increasingly using computer networks to deliver services across borders, while Africa still accounts for just less than 1% of global exports of digitally delivered services. Such exports grew by 15% in 2024, faster than any other region. The International Finance Corporation estimates the digital economy could be adding 700 billion to Africa's GDP by 2050. The technological shifts I referred to earlier are therefore creating exciting opportunities for our young people in services trade, particularly in the AI and digital space and the cultural industries. In sectors like retail, banking, and telecoms, Africans are investing in Africa. Our own Access Bank and UBA are two Nigerian financial institutions that have thriving operations across the continent. And as all of you know, Nigerian fashion, arts, and culture are another source of dynamism, and our music is without comparison. Across Africa and the world, more and more people want to wear our clothes, watch our movies, read our books, listen to our music, and eat our food. Why am I saying all this? I want you to know that much as I point out the challenges we face, we also have so many opportunities that we can seize, and I want us to make sure we seize them. Exciting as all of these examples are, we need to scale up our present successes. They are not at the scale we need them to be for them to make the impact we need. Governments will need to deliver, and businesses will need to step up and out of their comfort zones. One reason Africa accounts for less than 3% of global goods trade today is that Africa has some of the world's highest trade costs. WTO economists estimate that Africa's trade costs for agricultural goods are 16% higher than the average, for the rest of the world, and 37% higher for manufactured products. For trade within Africa, trade costs are 20% higher than for trade with external partners. It costs us more to trade with each other in Africa, 20% more than with the rest of the world. Isn't there something wrong with that scenario? We need to work on it. So what we need to work on, many of you know, President Obasanjo used to call it physical infrastructure, which remains a major problem to rebuilding regional value chains and tapping into global networks. This continent has the world's lowest density of paved roads, and there are not enough rail lines. According to the International Road Federation, Sub-Saharan Africa accounts for 18% of the world's land area, but only 5.6% of the global road network. There are signs that shipping connectivity, which is low between African ports, may be improving, but we still have a long way to go. With respect to energy, Sub-Saharan Africa has many oil producers: Nigeria, Angola, Equatorial Guinea, Uganda, Ghana, Congo, Brazza, Gabon, and I can go on. And yet so many homes and businesses lack electricity. You cannot industrialize and you cannot manufacture without electricity. With solar now becoming cheaper than gas, with our ability to produce, we have naturally God-given solar. Let us see how we can harness renewables for households so we can free the gas and oil-based power for manufacturing enterprises. If we can have a mix an energy mix that is in this direction, I think it will go a long way to help us cover the infrastructure gap. The picture for telecoms infrastructure is much better, with the leapfrog to wireless also making services much easier to trade. And I want to commend several African countries, including Nigeria, that are trying to set up better digital infrastructure. They have the plan. I think the issue is to now accelerate implementation. We also need to do a better job with our human capital. That's why we're here. We have so many young, talented people, but we need to skill them properly. I'm seeing the impact of AI is going to be huge coming up, and I mentioned quantum technologies. We need to make sure that our people are properly skilled to seize advantage of this. Finally, there's no escaping the fact that we need better governance. Our mineral resources have the potential to create shared prosperity, but instead we see that high prices are leading to illegal mining here at home and across the continent. We cannot accept situations in which our vast mineral wealth brings vast benefits to a handful of privileged but unscrupulous people, while local communities are forced off their land. We need to visibly fight this phenomenon, and we need to visibly fight corruption. In the same vein, growth and development will be difficult in the face of uncertainty and of conflict. Very few investors will risk their capital if they feel insecure. Nigeria needs to deal with the security problem. Nigeria and Africa must work on reducing conflict and improving security. Better governance is also about removing practical barriers to business activity and trade. On my flight back to Geneva after celebrating Christmas here at home, I found myself sitting next to an executive from a Chinese solar panel firm. And I, of course, started talking to him. He said, yes, he came here to look at some African countries to see if they could do exactly what I was proposing, set up manufacturing. But bad governance, corruption, demands for payments, bad infrastructure, red tape. And he was telling me he didn't know if he could do it. You see what I'm saying? If we want to really do what I'm proposing, which is let's manufacture here, we need to make the environment better for people who want to invest. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me now conclude. I'm firmly convinced that across Nigeria and across Africa, we can overcome these obstacles. We have what it takes to thrive in an increasingly complex world. Countries, businesses, entrepreneurs, and artists are showing us individually the way. But we have missed windows of opportunity before on this continent. I pray we will not do so again. We need our leaders in Africa and here at home to be proactive in seizing these opportunities before us for the sake of the people they serve. Frankly, we need followers, that's you and me, who are being governed, who are equally committed to long-term development and are willing to make their voices heard. It's not only about leadership, it's also about followership. My question and my challenge to you, ladies and gentlemen, is this. Will we demand more of our leaders? Will we demand more of ourselves? Will we? Yes. I hope we will. To the graduates, you have so much to contribute to Nigeria and to the continent and to the wider world. Paraphrasing what our famous author Chino Achebe told us, please tell your own story and let it be a story of success, of humanity, of positive impact on your country and society. Aliko Dangote also said, quote, in the journey to success, tenacity of purpose is supreme. So be bold, be tenacious, be dauntless, be willing to do what is right, be willing to stand up for what is right. Godspeed. I love this university. I look forward to following your story. Thank you again. It's been an immense honor. Up Naija! Up APU!